Hi, everybody. So, if you follow my stuff, you'll know that I generally critique things like replacement migration, the doctrine of multiculturalism, the doctrine of diversity being a glorious religious end in and of itself, not to be questioned ever. I'm critical of these assumptions and various offshoots, like real world kind of offshoots of that, I will look into and examine. But I will use terms very frequently like immigration industry or asylum industry. And I want to address those today because I understand that those at first glance might come across as conspiratorial. And of course, when something is deemed conspiratorial or sounds that way, it's important to back it up. And to back that up, I need to focus on a certain thing. And that thing today will be a policy document recently advertised by the Department of Justice. I see the Department of Justice as a great place to look at this because there are other institutions involved, supranational, corporate, sub-governmental, and all of this stuff. But I think the Department of Justice is a kind of central nodal point in that superstructure, so to speak, and that's the one to be looking at. And then within the Department of Justice and Equality, their full term, within that department, there are a multitude of things to look at, and it's hard to get them all in one place at one time to focus on. And this policy paper, which is called the Migrant Integration Strategy 2017 to 2020, I think just kind of pulls everything together. And I hope by taking you through the various political aspects and policy aspects of it, and then of the funding that they give out to other organizations, and the general tone and direction of this, and the pervasiveness of this document, you'll understand what I mean in a while. I hope when I show you that by the end of this video, you might, next time I say immigration industry or the government are socially engineering this to an extreme degree, this mass migration, these things I described earlier. When I say that in future, you might give me the benefit of the doubt based on the evidence shown here today. So without wasting any more time, I suppose we may as well just get straight into it. Now, okay, so here's the paper, and it goes through like 75 different specific policy items. I'm going to just talk about like 20 odd of them today because, some of them are a bit mundane and not very interesting. But I want to focus on the ones, obviously, that are interesting to some extent or another, right? And I'll try to be quick on these two because let's just fly through it, The first one here is government departments and agencies will ensure appropriate regular engagement with NGOs representing migrant groups. So again, I would talk about the idea that NGOs and the government are kind of one and the same thing. And the pretense between NGOs, it's oxymoronic because NGOs, the name suggests non-government organizations. So that's a paradox and a contradiction that needs to be pointed out constantly. I would rather if NGOs just call themselves the government, because for the most part, they're largely funded by the government. They carry out the government's objectives, even though they pretend that they don't. Like the government will liaise with the NGOs, but the government largely pays these NGOs, and the NGOs and the Department of Justice kind of sing off the same hymn sheet, So it's a weird outsourcing of things, and it allows for kind of unaccountable activities to be done by these NGOs because they get to maintain this faux distance, this fake distance from the government. Well, we're not the government. We're just like a charity when they're not, obviously, right? And we'll see this theme emerge loads throughout this. So they're talking about how we must engage more with the NGOs. So that's basically that. I'll try not to dwell too much on these things. Now, action 4 is the next one. Decisions on grants to community and sports organizations will include criterion on promoting integration activities. Now, integration might just seem like a nice old thing. And you know what? Largely it could be. It's not all terrible or something, but what I'm focusing on here is this idea that state money, state policy, state diktats and everything else are in everything. Every institution is pervaded with this stuff from the Department of Justice as the focal point. You can't get away from it. It's so inorganic, this stuff. It's quite unbelievable. Now, So let's move on. Action 10. I hope I'm not rambling too much for you, lads. Some of these now, I don't know what Action 10 is going to be, so I'm going to have to react to it now and try to remember the one I was at. And it's a bit of scrolling going on here too. So Action 10 is the fees for naturalization will be kept under regular review to ensure that costs are reasonable and do not deter applicants who are qualified. Now, this just struck me in and of itself, because they want to keep those fees down so as not to deter applicants who are qualified. Now, this debate happens all the time. What are you going to do? Kick all the immigrants out if you're, let's say, skeptical of immigration, and then the other people are the open borders people. And let's say the reasonable people in the middle are kind of going, well, no, like, we don't want to go kicking people out who are long-time citizens and all this. And that's fine. I agree with that. But here's a reasonable possibility. You say we're in a housing crisis, but yet we don't want to be draconian and far right and all of this. Well, you could keep the fees for naturalization and various migration kind of applications. You could just keep those fees really high, and that would just be a natural, harmless deterrent. Like here, they are saying it themselves: keep the cost down, so as not to deter applicants who are qualified. The housing crisis is out of control. Our infrastructure is jammed up. Our roads, our hospitals, our schools. Surely this would be a nice, peaceful, diplomatic kind of kind of incentive to just reduce immigration. Surely we need to do that at this point, right? Just based on numbers, on resources, on pressure on people to keep up on the rat race. Irish people, this would be a great opportunity, but the ethos here is to not deter people who are qualified. I think that's exactly what we should be doing. That's just my opinion. Action 11, a statutory scheme for long-term residency will be introduced. Now, this is one of those things that, like, I have some friends who will ask me all the time, like, they'll go, okay, I understand asylum seekers and I understand maybe tech worker visas and stuff like that, but just all the immigrants that you see around the place, like the sheer volume, like, how does that happen? And I find myself being like, I don't really know. They expect me to be a kind of a casual expert on it, and I'm kind of embarrassed because I don't know, because there's so many little schemes and so many different little bodies, and the policy is always moving and fluid, so you can never really tell. Like, you go, I don't know how they all get here, what the process is, to be honest. There's so many different ways, but this is just one of those kind of ways. Like, you see one of the goals in this document originally was a scheme for long-term residency to be introduced. So it's another one of these many ways, these many routes. And let me just read through some of this. There might be some dead air here now while I figure it out. So like people have to have been here for 60 months to apply for this long-term residency. And what the criteria when you apply are, look, I actually don't know. But again, it's just one of these things, say you've been here for 60 months. So what's that, 5 years? Then you can just apply. So it speaks to this theme of, like, how can people be here? Is the process really strict and really, binary and professional? Well, it's not. Like, largely speaking, in my opinion, just on a broad brushstroke sense, it's a matter of just whether it's the asylum industry or anything else, or the asylum system, we'll say, across the board, it seems like if you want to come here, you just get here and you just kind of hang in there and stay here, and then eventually, through a myriad of different ways, you can just kind of the Department of Justice are playing ball. Like, they aren't in the business so much of kicking people out, or they seem to be interested in constantly liberalizing the system, as this suggests. Why? On what basis? Which government was elected to do this? Why is it moving in this direction? Which poll was taken of the Irish public? No one knows, but it's moving constantly in this direction, like I say, without a mandate and without being publicized, to the extent where I don't even know, and I focus on these things where I don't even know in detail what the story is, but I know what direction it's going in. Now, what's next? So I was just on action 11, so the next one would be 14. Okay, so Arrangements to enable registration of non-EEA migrants under 16 years will be finalized as a matter of urgency. I actually included this one because I just wanted to ask you, the viewer, to let me know what you think of this one. You can see it on screen there. The immigration body will introduce registration for minors in 2022, when responsibility for registration of non-EU nationals is fully transferred from the Gardaí to INIS. This will ensure that minors do not have to present to Gardaí stations to register. Now, they mentioned it. The reason it struck me is because they mentioned it as a matter of urgency. So anything that's of a matter of urgency, even though I don't quite understand what they're getting at, I feel like, okay, what are they up to here? What's the idea? And it's had one or more major difficulties. That's the kind of score on this. So just, sorry to tell you, I don't know, but I'm actually asking you here. You tell me, does anyone know what the play is on this? What's this about? Anyway, this was action 14. So the next one is action 17. We move on. And action 17 says, incentives will be undertaken aimed at increasing the number of migrant representatives in local authority fora, like public participation networks and other representative fora. Now, public participation networks, they're just another little arm of the Department of Justice in regard to this migration diversity stuff. I mentioned them in my first ever video. I was kind of curious. I felt like they played a key role in Lisdoon Varna of getting this asylum centre, put into Lisdoon Varna, despite the town voting 93% against. And I was scratching my head at the time, thinking, how can this happen? How can it just be kind of how can they grease the skids like this and just have it happen? And I noticed that some of the reps and the liaison people were in the orbit of this public participation network. And basically, these networks were established ostensibly to be a kind of a representative thing for a community. So, ideally, you elect 7 people from your community, somehow get elected to this thing, right? And it's to bridge that gap between central government and local people, so you have the populace at large and then you have the government. This is a way for the government for representatives from your community to be like, hey, this is what we're interested in, and all of this stuff. But in my opinion, what I've noticed is that it's quite the opposite. It's more like and this isn't true for everybody in a public participation network, but I think generally they're more of a kind of, how would you put it? A kind of a little installed regime of the government who kind of, liaise and get on with the government in order to, as I've mentioned in other videos, I don't want to belabor it, to kind of subvert local communities and to kind of quell them, and so if the government want to do something there, they can just liaise with the public participation network, who will be the good people who go to committees and are very busy bees actives, but they're kind of selectively chosen people. And then you can say, well, we engaged with the community, when you really engaged with this kind of little installed kind of Pinochet style, Iran-Contra style, I'm joking there, but, kind of installed regime in a little community. It's a way to bypass communities. And now every PPN I look at, it involves this migration stuff and diversity and integration, and they're very heavy on all of that. And I just wanted to point that out, that, when I talk about that aspect of it and people say, is that a conspiracy theory or something? Well, it's mentioned more than once here, the public participation networks as a key aspect to increase the number of migrant representatives, which isn't, again, if someone happens to be a migrant representative on a PPN or any other thing, I've no problem with that. I'm talking about the strategic kind of policy of trying to increase the numbers and this kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm talking about here. I've no problem with it. Things that are organic. It's this kind of social engineering that I take issue with and like to examine. Now, the next one is Action 21. Sounds like a, conspiracy theory. Action 21. I'm thinking of Agenda 21. That's the one. I'm not saying that's a conspiracy theory or anything, but anyway, going off track there. Action 21 says, Department of Social Protection will continue to take measures to ensure that the habitual residence condition legislation is applied correctly and consistently. These measures include various things. Okay, so I want to explain what the habitual residence condition is. This is about so I'm not pointing fingers at any nationalities or anything here, but I'm just saying, this whole idea of Polish or Eastern European, you hear about it a lot. It's on in the media sometimes and all of that, where they live in Poland most of the year and they fly over to get dole or various benefits and go home, and things like this. So habitual residence condition is the idea of someone's applying for social services or for dole or whatever, from another country, a migrant. A habitual residence condition is you verifying that you aren't doing that, that like you do live here. So the criteria for that are like a regular rental payment, or where you live, a regular work, family members who also live here, stuff like that. And they want to ensure that it's applied correctly and consistently. Training is available to decision makers in the application of this HRC with a focus. Yeah, this is the interesting bit. Training the decision makers on this, with a focus on migrant access to social assistance. So again, if this was an unbiased Department of Justice, they could be saying this, training these people, with a focus to cutting this practice out or whatever. But what they're saying is a focus on migrant access to social assistance. It seems like the ethos here is to deconstruct the civil service who would, let's say, I would say, stand up to these things, or to correct for these things, or to prevent these fraudulent activities. It seems like the ethos here is to kind of deconstruct these things, and that's just how that looks to me. It's not my biggest argument ever, but what do you think? Action 22. The Migrant Consultative Forum will continue to offer the opportunity for NGOs whose primary focus is in dealing with migrants to engage on migrant-related aspects of social protection services on an ongoing basis over the lifetime of the strategy. So again, it's bring these NGOs who are, radically open borders focused and based borderline Antifa affiliated and all of this kind of stuff, almost without exception, to be engaging with the department on, of course they're funded by the department anyway, but to engage with the department who they're funded by, on migrant related social protection services. What do you think is going to happen there? Do you think it's to tighten up on that, or no, it's to liberalize and deconstruct it again? Now, Action 23, similar theme, I'd say. The Department of Social Protection will continue to provide up-to-date information and training to staff on entitlements for all clients in relation to its schemes and services, in line with its core values of the department, or the core values of the department: awareness and respect for equality and diversity. Blah blah blah. Now I'm trying to find what bit I found interesting enough to note this one. Yes. So the Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection provides cultural awareness training as a component of comprehensive frontline customer service training. It includes cultural diversity awareness, equality, dignity, respect. So I think this, generally my take on this, is this kind of propagandizing and it's like struggle session stuff. These unconscious bias trainings and all of this stuff. It's unbecoming of, I think, decent Irish people. To be honest, I think it's insulting and it's weird. But in my opinion, it becomes this. There's this layer of fear and layer of sensitivity, as they say, among our civil service now. So they are completely, defanged by this stuff, because I suspect this whole, discrimination card is always, just under the table, ready to be pulled out here. So there's going to be an element of defanging going on of the civil service, and that's the theme in these kind of few actions here that I'm trying to kind of get at. So the next one is Action 27. It's in the next section, actually, so it's on a different theme, this. Proactive efforts will be made to attract migrants into teaching positions, including raising awareness of the Irish language aptitude test and adaptation period for primary teaching. Now, again, this is just, if a migrant applies to become a teacher and becomes a teacher, absolutely fair play to you, brilliant, right? No problem with that. It's just this idea of social engineering. So they talk about it here, they have kind of goals, and it has been bandied about the goal of a certain amount of teachers being migrant and diverse ethnically and stuff. So again, it's like, the issue of ethnicity is injected in to the national conversation here by the Department of Justice and by the NGOs. Whereas if it's introduced in any kind of critical aspect, what is it? It's alt-right and all of this. These guys are ethnicity obsessed, and they want to integrate it into policy and socially engineer the country on that basis. Now, in this aspect, it's in regard to teaching. And now teachers, think of who teachers are. It's the Neves and the whatevers who go to Mary I, and they're very good and very decent, and they become teachers, and it's just an age old middle class profession for a decent class of Irish people. And now we have seen in recent years that it's become very difficult for teachers to get jobs. I've known many a friend who's trained up to become a teacher and struggled for a long time. There's a lot of baggage when you try to become a teacher, to get solid work, to get pay commensurate to living standards, especially urban living standards. It's a very difficult environment to get into after having spent all those years in college. And now what they're trying to say is, not just, oh, let's let ethnic diverse people become teachers, that's fine, or to whatever. It's to mandate it, and we're moving towards quotas here on this stuff. And it might sound nice and it's fine, but it means a reduction. It does mean a reduction in available space for Irish graduates. Like, if you're discriminating in favor of specific people, then you're naturally discriminating in disprivileging other people, right? And that is happening, and that this is going to be a real thing for Irish teachers who graduate. You and someone of African or Middle Eastern origin, or whatever it happens to be, especially if they're a recent migrant, they'll get extra points, I imagine. You and that person are interviewing for a job, and it's a job you would really love, and it's in a community you love, and you can rent there, and it's a perfect opportunity. And you and that person are equally qualified, or even you're slightly more highly qualified, perhaps. Regardless, who do you think is going to get that job in such an environment? It ain't going to be you. I'm sorry. And that's a real thing, that's not conceptual. So Action 28. The extension of the Free Fees Initiative to third level education to the children of migrants will be explored. Again, like this, okay, there's a lot of money going on in the state, swimming around the place, but there's a lot of need as well. And I just don't see whose interest this is in, of the Irish populace, to do this. It's just one of these things that, like, I don't have a huge qualm against it. I'm not saying this is a big deal, but it's just in the context of the direction of all of this stuff. It's like, who decided on that? Like, was it you consulted with an NGO that you give money to anyway? Is that your consultation and mandate getting process for this? Because no Irish person is like saying, hey, this is high on my list. Like the average Irish person's list, if they're for this at all, it's way down on the list. It's like, on what basis are these things being done? They're looking at, so as you see here, they're looking at it, progress to date, its status is on track to do that. And then at the end, I love how they note that the department will have to be cognizant that any further expansion of eligibility criteria will have cost implications for the exchequer. Yes, of course, so why are we doing this? I know it's good for like some a migrant who would like to go to college here. I'm not denying that it's good for them, but who is this government meant to be representing exactly? I think we're forgetting that. Okay, so Action 31. And I'm going through this so quickly and complaining about each individual one. I might sound very chip on the shouldery or whatever. I'm not like, losing sleep because of this stuff. It's just, you know, so it seems like I'm rambling constantly on one theme. It's because I'm going through this document and it's all in this context. That's why I'm focusing on all of this, and giving out about it to an extent. So the next one was 31. I was looking at. The effectiveness of training for teachers on managing diversity and tackling racism will be reviewed. So, minor problems or delays on that one. Now, it's like the effectiveness of training for teachers. So, again, it's people being, this struggle session stuff where teachers have to be trained on this stuff and they're going to be kind of walking on eggshells around these issues, and they're being trained on diversity. This isn't some objective training. This is ideological training, right? It's not diversity, it's diversity and tackling racism. The diversity and like tackling racism only goes in one direction. This won't be training on tackling racism, like of, let's say, ethnic minorities forming a clique and bullying a native person. They're not going to, and that can happen, and it can happen the other way around. Of course, it can happen in every way, but they're only going to be taught in one regard. So this is a specifically anti-Irish policy. And the point I'm making, because we know that much, but the point I'm making is that it's in sport, it's in teaching, it's in the bus driver, it's in everything. The Department of Justice are getting everyone with this stuff. So it's this mass institutional indoctrination going on. That's my point there, basically. The next one was 36, I think. Yeah, so on we go. No, I think the funding is going to be the really interesting part. It might blow your mind when you see the funding that's going on here. So bear with, if you find this stuff a bit boring, either bear with me or skip on forward. Anyway, so Action 26, the fostering and development of positive attitudes towards diversity and celebrating difference will continue to form part of the school curriculum. So again, fostering the development of positive attitudes towards diversity. Why is this in our school? Children are meant to learn about mathematics and learn Irish and whatever, right? Not government ideological stuff. Maybe, here's how to brush your teeth. The dentist comes in and tells you that. I can handle that much. But this kind of, seriously ideological stuff. I think half the country, I don't know if there's polls on this stuff, but if framed reasonably, there's at least half the country would tell you of critical perspectives towards diversity, or say, oh, well, I don't believe we should have much more immigration or stuff like that. So why is it that this like extremely radical and ideological, one-sided, cultish perspective on diversity, narrow, limited perspective on diversity is being taught to our kids to scare them in advance and to interfere with their minds at such a young age? It just really makes me sick that. So as we've seen in the last action, they're getting teachers and getting children at the same time. Action 40 is their next one. Okay. So some dead air going on here. Hope you're enjoying that. Next one is education or training programs specifically catering to unemployed migrants whose language skills require development will contain a language component. Now, here's where I kind of get a bit, might sound a bit dogmatic or something like that. It actually, my qualm here does sound a bit like Katie Hopkins. And it's funny because I only heard some interview with her today. And I was like, her brand of nationalism is actually not mine. I don't like it. She's very economically focused and, this kind of stuff. It's not my type of thing. And I'm going to sound like Katie Hopkins here a bit, so forgive me if it goes that way. But I think it's a point worth making. And think about this. Education or training programs specifically catering to unemployed migrants whose language skills require development will contain a language component. Why are we doing anything for these people? I'm not a conservative in the an American libertarian cutthroat conservative. I believe in social programs, but specifically catering to unemployed migrants whose language skills, basically who can't speak English. Like, why aren't the departments? Why isn't this action saying unemployed migrants who can't speak English will be immediately deported. I think, I don't know, I feel like 80% of the country would agree with that. I mean, what's the counter argument to that? I understand this whole thing that it enriches us, it's great for the economy, it's this and that. They will say that stuff about migration generally, and that's an argument you can have. But they're specifically saying here, unemployed migrants who can't speak English, here's our education and training program, which costs money, right? Why would you do that? Why aren't they just saying, we'll deport these guys? Like, they could still be pro migration, but just on this extreme end, be like, yeah, we'll deport these guys because lots of people around the country can't afford to have a house, or to have children, for Christ's sake, or to keep their car going. Um, some people are struggling worse than that, and we have 10,000 homeless people on the street, as people often mention. That doesn't mean you need to cut all migration or this or that. But why is the only thing the Department of Justice should be saying about unemployed migrants who can't speak English is the only catering they should be doing is catering to their flight home, obviously. And that's fair. I like, let's say China. Migrating to China for me would be very difficult. There's a lengthy process to get in, and you might not even be very welcome there. But like, I mean, if I couldn't speak a word of Chinese and I was just unemployed, like I was like just unemployed of my own volition, I hadn't sought out or secured work, I wouldn't like knock on the Chinese government's door, so to speak, and be like, "What are you going to do for me?" I'd expect them to just be like, uh, either go home or starve. I mean, and that sounds cruel. I'm not saying that should be done, but that's what they would say. They would say it's not our problem. If you're going to be here at all, you're on your own, kind of thing. Like, and we will not only give social protections, but we'll specifically make it our problem to rectify the situation that a migrant is unemployed and can't speak English. What's going on? This is insane stuff, and I think anybody could agree with me on that. Um, Now, Action 42 is our next one. So, an analysis will be undertaken to assess the extent to which the level of joblessness among job seekers of African origin exceeds that of other groups, and determine what action, if any, is required to address any evidence that people of African origin face higher barriers to exit unemployment. I think they have a mistake there, but anyway, they're saying that there's a high rate of unemployment around Africans. Don't blame me there. Don't call me this or that. This is what they're saying, or they're suggesting that there's evidence. They're looking into that. And indeed, as it turns out, that is the case, right? And then their progress or their status is complete on that. The department has completed this analysis and the report has been published. Now, what the report does is it kind of segues the fact of the matter into this idea that Africans have a low employment rate because of racism, which I don't think the evidence for that is very strong. In particular, why isn't, surely if there's a racist employer or something, they would be equally racist to a Chinese employer, or Chinese in Ireland largely employ themselves, actually, to be honest. But whatever racism would be there wouldn't just be dropped for Chinese or Indian or Arab people. Like, it doesn't make sense at all, that, right? And I'm not giving out about this unemployment thing or whatever, but like, their answer to that, it's so dogmatic. Like, there was an article in the Irish Times just recently saying that assault numbers have gone up in Ireland, therefore we need to collect the ethnicity of the victims. Now, that doesn't make sense. Of course, like, if assault goes up, like, the no matter what the ethnicity of the people who did it are, if you're examining the kind of profile of these this crime, the only sensible way is to examine the perpetrators, surely. But it's twisted. So basically, no matter what happens, even if something happens that gives mass immigration a bad look or something like that, they will actually do this gaslighting flip of it. No matter how clear the evidence is that there's a problem, they not only will ignore the problem, but spin the complete opposite. So, on one side, people would say a lot of Africans are unemployed. That's bad. The person in the middle might say, it's not a big deal. Let's not blame people. Whereas the government, the NGOs, and the media will go all the way to say, no, it's everybody else's fault. It's crazy. So anyway, I rambled. Hands in the air. I did it. So anyway, I'll move on. Action 44. Proactive outreach and support measures will be undertaken by all public sector employers to increase the number of persons with an immigrant background. Okay, so I'll just make this shorter. Basically, to increase the level of immigrants in the civil service, effectively. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but yeah, that's it. And again, it's, I've no problem with something like this happening organically, but it's this kind of it's this social engineering. I don't like it. Again, we always hear that diversity is our strength and immigration will only make us so strong, much stronger and all that. If it's that great, then why do you need to socially engineer it so damn hard? It doesn't make sense at all. They're having to manage this very, rigorously. So they are. So that was action 44. The next one is 45. To make the civil service fully representative of Irish society, we will aim to have 1% of the workforce from ethnic minorities. Now, I don't know where the civil service is trying to get away easy here, because Irish people in this country are about 80%, which is 20% migrants, most of them being ethnic minorities, obviously. 1%. That's not right. It should be a lot more than that. But anyway, let's move on. Action 50. Okay. So the recording of ethnicity as part of ethnic quality monitoring across the health service will be promoted as a means of identifying unique needs of migrants and developing interventions to address these needs. I'm into that. I agree. I think they should record that because it would be a good method for us to track, shall we say, replacement migration, because census figures are unreliable. But I think this would be quite a good. This sewage in Dublin is another good way to look at it. Apparently, there's a lot of people unaccounted for based on our sewage, but this would be another kind of objective way to look at it. So that's the only reason I'm pointing that out. Action 53 is our next one. A migrant integration forum will be established in every local authority area, ideally through existing public participation. So again, PPNs again are of great interest to this Department of Justice in regards to migration and socially engineering the Irish public. The next one is Action 56. Encourage businesses to focus on integration. Okay, so this is the whole idea of socially engineering private businesses to do this stuff. Again, they're not leaving anything to chance here. They have a big hill to climb on this stuff, and they have to push so hard, and so much money has to go into this. So I'm just demonstrating here. It's teachers, it's sport, it's businesses, it's everything. So that was 56. 58. Okay, so 58. Migrants will be encouraged to participate in local and national politics to the extent that these areas are legally open to them. So again, it's getting out the migrant vote, which get the old migrants to vote for good old Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the uni party, the one party state. They're not explicitly saying that or anything, but I mean, an urban migrant concentrated population can be easily managed, because if you have a largely Asian, let's say, community, you can just get the ethnically Asian, big party candidate with the big party apparatus and money machine, and you just kind of have an automatic vote. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to ethnic communities, but these things can be quite straightforward like that. And it replaces maybe some of these rural votes they're losing at the moment. So I think that's how they're playing this. And that's my opinion. Article 59, which was, similar idea. They'll be supported and encouraged to register to vote and exercise their franchise. If you go to my Twitter, actually, and go to the top, I'll pin the tweet. There's a Foil Arms and Hog or whatever, this kind of comedy group did a little sketch, and they're not like I don't think they're politically opinionated on this stuff. They just made a funny kind of joke on this, which speaks exactly to this. You will laugh when you see it. It's really funny. Encouraging them to vote and exercise their franchise. Interesting. So the next one is Action 61, and I think they get quite interesting from here, so I'm gonna kind of go through them, more of them. So this is where it gets a bit tougher and a bit more serious, I think. Intercultural awareness training will be provided by all government departments and agencies, and it will be reviewed at intervals to ensure that it is adequate and up to date. Frontline staff will receive ongoing cultural awareness training appropriate to their role and operational requirements. So here we see, like, they're talking about the various progress. Dublin Bus, Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, prison service, everything. They're all being socially engineered on this. So I'm just going to... Local authorities will take action to have migrant representation on all joint policing committees. So again, my point I keep saying here, no problem with all these things happening organically, fine. An Garda Síochána will continue to implement a victim-centred policy and good investigative practices in racial and other similar crimes to encourage victims to report offences in line with recommendations of the Garda Inspector in this regard. Now, encouraging victims to report offences by all means. But this whole encouraging people to report offences, we'll see there's a lot of this now, so stay tuned. The Garda National Diversity and Integration Unit, I'm going to call this the GINDU, monitors hate crime on a daily basis and encourages victims and witnesses to report any suspected incidents and immediately make contact with an investigating Gardaí who fail to follow appropriate reporting procedures. Newly appointed Garda call takers and dispatchers are trained to ensure any evidence of hate crime is captured while taking reports of crime from the public. Now, this is crazy. Despite efforts by the dedicated ethnic liaison Gardaí and the Gindu, the reported figures on hate crimes are low. Despite efforts by... Like, why is there an effort to make this happen? And despite... the reported figures are low despite the efforts? What are they trying to say? They're implying that there is a mass culture of rabid racism and hatred going on around the country. It's so insulting to the Irish public, this, and it's insane, and it's quite obvious that this thing doesn't exist, but they're trying desperately to make it exist. And this goes back to the NGOs and the European network against hate or all this kind of bullshit stuff, but it's coming from a very high level, and it's coming from then the NGO level too, and this is the big thing now. Hate crime, hate speech, and all of this, and they're drumming up the numbers as high as they can, and they're getting frustrated that no one's reporting, assuming that it's a reporting issue, not a it's not happening issue. The Gindu, this Gardaí diversity patroller type thing, is known to all ethnic representative groups. Is it known to the Irish ethnic representative group or just the other ones? And NGOs working in the area of hate crime in Ireland, and encourages all such representatives and members of NGO groups to... So members of NGO groups, again, these guys are getting police power. They have a direct line of communication to the police, and these guys are rabid activists, right? And funded by the government. To inform all victims of hate crime of this confidential Garda service, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Oh, yeah, so... recent communication events have included a presentation on the topic of challenging racism in society at the annual conference of Igbo Nigerians. Okay. We're living in absolute clown world. Attendance at the Spirazi event for asylum seeker victims of torture. Okay, that's, no crimes there. Presentations focused on challenging any form of hate crime and how to report suspected cases. Okay, so looking ahead, how to address the low reporting by victims of hate crimes despite all the public's... how to address the low reporting. Maybe it's just low reporting because there's low incidence. Because how can they prove that there's a high incidence if it hasn't been reported? They're imagining that the Irish people are awful and it's disgusting. And again, which mandate exists for this? Despite all the public messaging, they're admitting it straight up here. And attempts to recruit ethnic minorities to the Gardaí. Again, no problem with ethnic minorities in the Gardaí, just not the socially engineering aspect of it. That's my problem. And the AGS, whatever that is, sorry, I don't know, adopted the definition of hate crime as laid down in the McPherson report. This is unbelievable. Hold on to your hats for this. This is their definition of a hate crime. Any incident which is perceived to be a hate crime by the victim or any other person will be recorded as a hate crime. Any incident perceived to be a hate crime by the victim or any other person will be recorded as a hate crime. Like, this is insanity. And even on that basis, their numbers are too low for their liking. I mean, this needs to go, this stuff. It's intolerable. The police must record any such report, etc. So here's a job for you there watching. The new Garda Diversity Strategy, 2019 to 2021, blah, blah, blah. But that, Garda Diversity Strategy 2019-21, I'll have a look at that in my own time. But one of the points I'm trying to make in this video is we should all be going through this stuff, as boring as it is, and as much as we kind of know what they're saying anyway. Go through the detail and understand it. That's what it is to do journalism, and it's important that we all do that. Instead of just reacting to the latest conflict or saga, try to look into this stuff and take little nuggets out of it and share it to everybody else, so have a read off that if you get a chance. I will too. Now the next one is local authorities will develop and publish their policy on the early removal of racist graffiti in their respective areas. Look, whatever, I'm not supporting graffiti, but it's funny, this kind of panic. And so they want the local authorities to report back to the Department of Justice on their policy for removing racist graffiti. Have we lost our marbles, lads? The current legislation with regard to racially motivated crime will be reviewed with a view to strengthening the law against hate crime, and crucially, here, pay attention, including in the area of online hate speech. So when people say, oh, hate crime's just about if you beat someone up and they happen to be some other type of ethnicity. No, wrapped up in this, all in one thing, is online hate speech too. They want to make it so that the stuff I'm saying right now, this critique of the state, will not be allowed. Because, of course, if you disagree with me there, ask the Department of Justice whether they think what I'm saying now is racism or hate. They will say it is. So their definition is very broad. Don't think you can just keep PC enough to get away with it. They're attacking the very idea of critiquing this superstructure. That's what they're talking about. So progress to date, they want to update the Incitement to Hatred Act, combating racism and xenophobia. We know what that means. That's not about shouting racial slurs at people. That's being against the state. Looking ahead, the department has included in its research plan for 2019 a project to consider approaches taken to hate crime in other jurisdictions. So they're kind of examining alternatives. So they're probably looking at Canada, probably would be a big example. Britain, have you got a license for that opinion, or all of that? Same in France, maybe, and Germany too. Including an assessment of their success and the outcome of that will inform any future legislative reform. So they're putting out a tender for people to do research on that. It's ridiculous. Could they not just have a conversation on it and figure it out as adults? Anyway, next, the issue of underreporting of racially motivated crime will continue to be addressed, including through the development of greater contact with marginalized communities. Again, so it's the same old stuff here again. They're repeating themselves. The Gardaí National Diversity and Integration Unit continues to develop contact with minority groups. So they're trying to drum up this thing that doesn't exist, and they're getting frustrated. This is so totalitarian, this one. Action 67. Public offices will display information on how to make a complaint of racist behavior by a member of staff or any other customer. Now, clearly, the idea of racist accusing people of racism is obviously, very much overplayed and can be weaponized, right, against people strategically. So public offices will now have to display information right in front of them, being like, here's how you can complain me for being racist or whatever. And again, people just aren't. Racism is basically like, it's not, it basically doesn't exist. I mean, you know I'll be kind of harassed for saying that, but like, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It's just, it's not this pervasive monster everybody makes out, and it's really insulting and really intimidating for staff to have that kind of a sword hanging over their head, and they know, in the event of this happening, who the the invigilator will side with automatically. It won't be them. I think it's very cruel, actually, that. Um, so next up, we have all relevant public sector bodies will explore additional ways of working in cooperation with communities affected by stigmatization, etc. Okay, that's kind of just bullshit. I'll kind of skip that one. Whatever, same kind of stuff over and over again. Here, this one is interesting. Arts and culture programs and policy will assist in the promotion of the arts and culture of diverse communities across Ireland. I don't know. Should you not just be focusing on Irish art, and if someone else wants to do other art, leave them at it, because it's a free country and art doesn't have to be that expensive, and just let it happen. I'm not so against a bit of money for African culture or something like that, but it's this idea of like, like when every culture on earth, every little subgroup starts to have more money and becomes more celebrated and more kind of supported than our own culture, which disappears, as it is doing. Nobody can deny that. And of course, in the arts and culture, I don't think this is specifically mentioned here, but it is true. In the arts and culture industry, the state-sponsored one, so state art, this whole thing of promoting diverse messages and all this kind of stuff is in there as well. So it's for the kind of the lady with the horn-rimmed glasses directing her play, who's already ideologically on board anyway, is now given money to write a play about how racist everybody is, how racist normal people are, or whatever. So we have this kind of state art type stuff. It's pretty rank, like. So I could have gone through that in more detail. You can just look through that yourself if you're interested. There's loads in that, actually. The Arts Council, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, Screen Ireland, so film too, Article 70. We're getting towards the end. Schools outside the established education system will be encouraged to network with the aim of providing information on child protection and health and safety regulations. Okay, I'm skipping that one. Sorry, not particularly interesting, or evocative of any kind of critique, as far as I can tell. Measures to combat racism and xenophobia will feature among the actions funded by the Office for the Promotion of Migrant Integration. So again, combating racism and xenophobia. They call, like, everything is racism and xenophobia to them. Everything that doesn't celebrate everything they're doing is racism and xenophobia. Don't think that it's a skinhead with a swastika tattooed on it type of guy, and that's your racist and xenophobia. No. It's what I'm saying now. So if you think what I'm saying now is, pretty reasonable and, fair critique and stuff like that, or whatever, then that's what they're talking about. I'm sure I'm pretty high up on their list of enemy target type people. And, look, I'm not what they're trying to say I am in this. And that's who they will be targeting. And you know what? Go for it. Target show racism the red card. So it's in sport too, because working class people like to stand up for their own communities and they have pride, and they don't, so that's a big reason I think they target football. So usual stuff, basically, that, now I think we're not at the end of this yet. Volunteering will be promoted, no harm there. I'm not just giving out about everything, so. And then we get into sport. Nothing is immune from the social engineering of our time. I think this exceeds anything the Catholic Church were well, not everything the Catholic Church were doing, but it's almost on a par with it. This level of social engineering, and it involves shaming and maintaining order, and interfering in every aspect of public life. The potential of sport in the integration of immigrants will be further explored through the encouraging active. I have no particular qualm with that. I'm going to be honest here and not just rant and rave about everything. Yeah, in just a general sense, you will see it when we look at the funding, that it is quite insidious. But the individual points here are not too bad. It's just targeting racism, quote unquote, and it's just the fact that I would expect sporting institutions to be unconnected to borderline Antifa NGOs, and having this political message in the air and stuff. Is there any place you can get away from this stuff? Not according to the Department of Justice, unfortunately. So trying not to blackpill everybody too hard here. Yeah, I'm going to kind of skip over some of that stuff. So now, yeah, so I'm going to go to page. Okay, we're going to skip on to funding here. And there's going to be more dead air for you. Try not to take too long, because the funding is really fascinating. Like, there's a lot. And I think it speaks to more than everything I've said so far when you just go straight to the money. So I actually might put in the description of the video, just for anyone who gets bored on the first while of the video, to just skip onto this funding bit. So here we go. All of the different funding mechanisms and all of the different places it goes and the amounts, all kind of listed in one place. So I'm delighted to have found this. I'm just going to take a drink. So here we have the Clare Immigrant Support Centre. Okay, so what do they do? Not very much in particular, but they receive a lot of money. Now, okay, yeah, so look at this, like 180 grand for their grant. The project will support the personal capacity in excess of 2,100, that's migrants basically, refugees and asylum seekers, to successfully establish and maintain their lives in Ireland by improving their skills to positively integrate. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm going to skip on. Crosscare, 248 grand. The project will focus on two key areas: capacity building of frontline services in the statutory and voluntary sector that work with our target group, with a focus on those who are marginalised, vulnerable, or in crisis, targeting social workers, medical workers, domestic violence, refuge staff. No problem with domestic violence refuges being supported in any regard, migrant or not. So I'm going to openly not complain about that aspect of it. But Crosscare, like, they're problematic. They overall in 2018 received 25.5 million through the various fundraising mechanisms that they do, and of that their staff are paid 18.2 million. So that is, what is that, 71% of their money goes to their staff. So, and they do some, they do stuff for homeless people. This is a big NGO, this is quite a broad one. But regardless, we're getting the idea that these guys are charities, and their 71% is going on staff. So when you look at the insidious things they do with migration and suppressing the public and all of this, 71% of this is on the staff. So you can see how it perpetuates itself and protects itself, and it makes sure that it grows and continues to grow. It's a living organism in itself at this point, self-sustaining and propagating. Now, that applies to all of these NGOs pretty much. Like, as a general rule of thumb, it's at least 70% goes to their staff. So just keep that in mind going forward as well. Now, Doris Lumna is the next one here, 234 grand. Now, they're another one of these NGOs with a report racism thing. So again, it's not just like giving soup to the needy or food. No, it's this kind of social engineering. Again. Now, next we have Edmund Rice, 47 grand. That's not one of the bigger ones. The FAI getting 150 grand. Foster integration in Irish society using football by mobilising community participation nationally within a project framework that supports alliances and collaborative actions between local clubs, etc. We see here they're meant to engage with NGOs in collaborative alliances. So again, the NGOs are all powerful. Um, it's NGOocracy or something. I've been trying to work on a term that's kind of pithy, and I can't figure one out. But we do live in an NGO state, clearly. Galway City Partnership, so they have a big between the Galway Network Against Racism and all these different things. There's a lot of money goes into Galway City. I think it's because they have a couple of asylum centres and stuff, so they need to suppress opposition. The Immigrant Council of Ireland get 150 grand. Irish Refugee Council get 300 grand. The project will provide services to asylum seekers. I mean, just read through this stuff for yourself. A lot of it is extremely arcane. You kind of go, what actually are they spending the money on in terms of tangible services? And I myself have a background with NGOs. I know this stuff in detail. I know the language you're meant to use, the bullshit language you're meant to use to get this funding and to kind of justify the funding. So I can see emptiness when I read it. I know how to see it, and it's there in a lot of this stuff, almost all of it. The Irish Traveller Movement get 150 grand. Now, I actually only a couple of weeks ago there, I was taking a walk in the park. I got talking to a traveller guy randomly, and he was saying that these NGOs, these traveller NGOs, are complete frauds, that they are only in it for the money, that they don't represent the Irish traveller community at all. The things like Pavy Point and all of these, and I'm sure this is included too, just the same. Jesuit Refugee Service or Rhetorical Friends, so they get 180 grand. I'm going to speed through this actually, because you know what, I just want to emphasize this stuff. Killarney Anti-Racism blah blah, 180 grand. Kilmallock Performing Centre, 42 grand. Then they'll engage with 6,000 students in schools using drama to combat racism and raise awareness of the benefits of legal migration. Again, this political indoctrination, not cool. Leash Partnership Community get 150 grand to support asylum seekers, blah blah blah. Mary I get 300 grand. Migrant Rights Centre of Ireland 250 grand. NASC 200 grand. Yeah, so if you read this, if you're watching still, again, very vague on what they're actually doing. 150 grand for National College of Ireland, 150 grand for blah blah blah. Okay, I'll speed through more of these. 750 grand goes to Spirazi, who do they're as far as I know, their role is to provide rehabilitation to victims of torture. No problem there. Fair is fair. I don't complain about everything as a strict rule or anything. That's if that money helps people who've to be rehabilitated from having experienced torture, then no problem with that. It's the social engineering stuff that I have a problem with, and most of this is that. So it's important to be clear on that. Now, so this other fund, the European Social Fund for Integration, business in the community, their grant award is 1.9 million. County Kilkenny Leader Partnership, 357. And again, I'm kind of getting tired of it to some extent. I hope you're not getting as tired of it as I am, because it does so much of it. It kind of, the detail becomes too hard to care about after a while. But 350 grand to this, and that's just one of many. There is a class of people being enriched based on this. Like I said, Crosscare, 70% of their money is on staff. The same, at least, is true for almost all of these. So what 70% of that? 360 grand. There is a class of people who like to elevate themselves beyond us and indoctrinate us, and to like I say, to elevate themselves above everybody else, that they are the kind of ruling class in society of our social and cultural ethos, and they're paid to do it. It's really hard. I'm not going to say there's no way, because I'm trying to, but it's very hard to compete with this kind of power. Like, I have gone to a few asylum center towns to kind of report and on what's going on and do a little bit of activism and stuff too. And I do that out of my own pocket. A tank of petrol just once in a while, once in a blue moon, and then the rest. Because someone asked me recently, "Are you funded by anyone?" And I said, "No, it's a tank of petrol once in a while and a broadband connection, which I have anyway, both of which come out of my pocket." But yet you have like the national news, like, pulling their hair out because I exposed a few things. If I'm a big deal in that sense, out of my own pocket, with nothing, just with a phone and a car, then what kind of impact do you think 357 grand multiplied by, what's the next one get? 327 grand for culture, I don't know how to pronounce that, Oscuelga, celebrating diversity, 330 grand for new communities partnership, one after the other. What kind of outsized impact do you think these guys are going to have? It's a machine. It is an absolute machine, this. And this is why I want to show you this stuff. So this is New Communities Partnership. Now, I mentioned this in a previous video. I called into their office, and they had like a little handwritten sign on the wall explaining how they'll, consult with the department to get your citizenship sorted out or your immigration status, and they were doing cash only. So they wanted cash only from their migrants, clients, which is kind of cruel because they're getting 330 grand from the government. And then it's also kind of corrupt because they're the ones who are liaising with the department to kind of do your application for you. It's completely corrupt. This is Gambin level corruption. This is Charles Haughey, like old style, like obvious, like, vested interests, and they should be completely recusing themselves from all this. But the opposite is happening. It's all money, money, money going back and forth. The incentive structure is toxic here. So there's another 350 grand. I'm not even going to focus. There's too much going on here for me to focus on all of these. More combating racism here, blah, blah. Now, I'll just shrink the screen a bit here so we can see. Okay, so this is under a different fund, the National Integration Funding Program. It's a kind of smaller numbers here, slightly. 100 grand for the Marino Institute of Education Migrant Teacher Program. Again, it's just it. So on one level, it's going to NASC, it's going to Irish Refugee Council, these horrible, vile NGOs, right? But then on the other end, there's money being given to like just random things, GA clubs, institutes of education, the CIE, the this, the that. There's a bit of money going everywhere, and it's that little, and the money comes with attachments, clearly. So this is all pervasive. So when I talk about the immigration industry, do not. I know this potentially has been a little bit boring, but it's worth it for just to make this point. Do not come to me and call me a conspiracy theorist the next time I talk about the immigration industry, So NASC get another 75 grand. Sport Against Racism Ireland get 90 grand. So this is separate to any other mention of funding that people have gotten. Tralee International Resource Centre, Show Racism the Red Card, 100 grand again. Whatever these ones are. Third Age, what's this one? I'm interested in this. 300 grand for Fáilte Stock as a nationwide project that involves training local volunteers to become English language tutors, who then deliver free English language tuition to basically teaching these migrants to speak English. I thought diversity was their strength. Something that's your strength doesn't cost you 300 grand. Okay, these are smaller numbers. We've 300 grand here for integration in schools, tackling racism and xenophobia. Again, I feel like I'm reading this phrase constantly, and I have to emphasize always, we know what this actually means. That's a euphemism. And not for this culture thing, or culture. I don't know. I'm sorry for the Gaels, or the Gaelgors. I'm afraid I'm mispronouncing that. I don't know. 208 grand for them. Strengthen support services for migrants, or to provide support services. and to develop the capacity of local migrant groups to engage with decision makers and NGOs. Now, this is an example of what I mean by bullshit NGO funding speak. Imagine 208 grand. I hand you 208 grand and I go, what are you going to do? You're going to build me a house? Are you going to make me dinner? What are you going to do for me? What's the actual tangible job? And if you say, well, I'm going to develop the capacity of local migrant groups to engage with decision makers and NGOs. Fuck does that mean? Anyway, excuse my language, sorry. 225 grand for the mendicity, perhaps, institution, the mendicity institution, whatever they are. Just more. Another 117 grand for the corrupt New Communities Partnership that I mentioned previously. The D4, lol. The Dormant Accounts Fund. Now, this is a fund of kind of expired bank accounts which haven't been touched in a long time. They're just, it doesn't seem like anyone owns it anymore. They basically go into those bank accounts, use those funds for so-called charities, and which is insane because it's not charities, it's government agenda. They're taking like dead people's accounts. I think it might be dead people or just dormant accounts. Now, there is a provision for if someone comes back to that account and says, hey, where's my money? It's kind of reimbursed, if and when that happens, which they don't expect it to because the account has been dormant for so long. But they're still reaching into accounts to promote the government agenda. That doesn't seem right to me at all anyway. So there's this culture organization again, 99 grand, Irish Refugee Council another 76, NASC another 54. NASC, I've gone through this before, a lot of theirs goes on staff as well and enriching themselves and promoting themselves. This pays for their Chardonnay and their Merlot and their Tempranillo, this 54 grand for the most part. So we have 73 grand for the Roscommon project, Syrian to work with Syrian female refugees in Ballahadreen. It almost seems surreal reading this stuff. So a big theme you will notice here as well is that a lot of this money will be quite regional. So you might see a lot of it goes here, a lot of it goes there. In specific areas. That's because there have either been a lot of asylum centres open there, a lot of migration has gone to there. They might not be economically doing so well themselves, or crucially, there might be plans, secretive plans to open direct provision centres and all of this stuff there. So they're getting the money in advance, and that money isn't for the greater good of every resident who lives there. That will go to the key people, the key community leaders, so to speak. It's kind of busybodies, do-gooders and all that, to kind of grease their palm in advance, so to speak, and be like, you'll welcome diversity, won't you? And they go, sure, of course I would. And then a year later, oh, there's an asylum centre, you surely won't stand up for your community when this happens, will you? And they go, no, of course not, we welcome diversity, etc. Westmeath community development. So there's a lot going on in Meath and Westmeath. So CIF projects, Communities Integration Fund, these are smaller figures. But again, it's that, I'm reminded of kind of the gangster, the Scarface, or the kind of guy who like makes it big and walks around his community in his fur coat handing out $20 bills to the kids, thinking that he's making, and they kind of buying that loyalty. Oh, he's our hero. I feel the same way with these 5 grand. Now, this is a pittance in the grand scheme of things, but it's just that little, spending money with a bit of strings attached for all these kind of, random institutions. The Burren Gales Football Club, the Southwest Clare Community Radio, the Clare Women's Network, the I'm picking these out random, the Roma Support Group. Okay, that makes sense. The New Communities Partnership is no surprise, but it's the other ones interest me more. The Inishowen and Development Partnership. What does that remind you of? Maville? Perhaps. We have, I'll just try to find the ones that, Jesuits again popping up here. Not going to put your scapegoat Jesuits here. That's not what I'm about. But Swim Ireland, Fingal Ethnic Network. So Fingal is, obviously there was this report a few years back that Fingal, like a huge proportion of their people on the social housing list were non-Irish. So, if you're going to have realities like that in a community, you sure better be funding all of these little supposed representative networks with, a little cash money here and there to keep them stum. So, I hope I'm getting near the end here, because it's just so much. And maybe that demonstrates my point that, the further we go on, the less interesting it gets, because there is just so much, because it repeats itself over and over and over like crazy. Mead, there's a big thing on mead. I think mead is Mosney, isn't it? So that's natural enough. So these are all the thousands going around here. Mayo, at some point they talked about Southwest Mayo. So that would be between Westport and Killary. I see a lot of money going around there. I haven't spotted it now, but on my original reading, I noticed that. So anyone who lives between Westport and Killary, or the fjord there, don't be surprised when there's some kind of direct provision centre announced in that region in the near future. Mark my words on that. So, God, there's so much more. I can't even. I'm actually, my eyes are going squinty at this point. But look at the extent of it. Just look and open this document yourself. And I know it's $5,000, but it's going to everybody. Everyone's getting a little taste, And again, the money isn't for free. Galway, Kerry, all of the Kilcock GAA Club, Monaster Evan Youth Action, on and on. I mean, I am actually praying for this to end, because I can't go on forever. Okay, there we go. So let's go back to a little camera for some conclusion, which I haven't prepared. So I'm going to keep this kind of brief. It's the main purpose of this was just to demonstrate that when I talk about the immigration industry, it's not a conspiracy theory. And the other thing I wanted to do was to emphasize how much I want everybody to look through all this stuff, get detail on it, keep a close tab on it. Don't just get caught up in the political argy-bargy. Look into all of these things. There was a Garda diversity report, I think 2018 to 2021 or something mentioned in this. Look through that, figure it out, get ahead of the curve on this to know what's going on. We all know this hate speech thing is going to come in pretty soon. We need to be keeping a close eye on that. I don't think there's anything we can do about it. We'll just cross that bridge when we come to it. But still, being informed of the kind of dry, can seem boring state apparatus on this stuff is important, because you can collate all this stuff down and present it to other people and show people what's going on. Because I find I often, and I must do more videos on this, probably much more concise videos than this, but I will often talk to people about the NGOs, and they'll say, what do you mean the NGOs? And I'm like, oh right, okay, I assume you know about it. And they're like, tell me about it. And I can't wrap my head around it so much. I'm like, they're everywhere. But no, these assumptions aren't clear to everybody. So it's good to go through all these policies and how much money people get and put it in one place. I must do that. I didn't do it with this video, but do that yourself, because we have to. And I think I made the point that we have an immigration industry like nothing else, social engineering on a mass scale. And so when people in towns like Uachtarard and all of these different places that kind of briefly kind of cut against the system, and there's this massive shock and tremor in the web when that happens, people are caught in the headlights and they don't know what's going on, and it's so strange and they can't quite define it, because this fear and indoctrination is under every fingernail. It's everywhere. And the Department of Justice know what they're doing. They are highly, highly, highly sophisticated. They are not just a bunch of gone beans. Some of them are, but there's a lot of people behind the scenes. I'm not going to name them now, in the Department of Justice and all of these NGOs. And there's all these meetings happening, and they're highly, highly sophisticated. And I think we need to just be equally sophisticated to match, something I forgot to do in my last video, which was the whole spiel of like, share, subscribe, all of that kind of stuff. I do love, as I always say, the subscription, because it's nice to see this kind of growing audience number, and that I can rely that more people will see the next one or care to see the next one or whatever. So subscription is free. So if you liked the video or have liked any of the other ones, do subscribe, and more importantly, take it easy. Thanks for watching.